Thomas held his hands up, but he did not throw fire. The smoke in the back room rolled around his fingers like it was waiting for him to panic. The two ashen-hand men coughed and shifted in the haze, trying to find him. Hemlock sat tied to the chair, eyes wide, rope half melted and loose at his wrists. But he stayed still like a man who knew one wrong move could get him killed. Lady Sarah did not cough, or the smoke parted around her. As if it feared her, she stood in the center of the room, like a cold candle flame, steady, calm, and deadly. Ash magic curled in her palm, dark and heavy, not like ordinary smoke. It moved with purpose, like a living hunger that wanted to bite into warmth and swallow it. Your blood hums, she repeated, voice soft. It sings like a forge bell, loud, proud, easy to follow. Thomas swallowed. His heart hammered, and he felt heat rise in him like a wave rushing toward shore. One wild burst could end this fast. One wild burst could also set the forge, the roof, the whole village on fire. He remembered Ignis's lesson. Control, no panic. Panic is noise. Thomas breathed in slowly. He forced his thoughts to become simple, like hammer strikes. 1. Calm. 2. Focus. 3. Protect. He glanced at Hemlock. The old man's jaw was set, but his eyes begged Thomas to live, not to win. Thomas shifted his stance, putting his body between Sarah and Hemlock. Sarah's mouth curved slightly. That loyalty is cute, she said, but loyalty burns first. The ashen-hand man with the glowing rod stepped out of the smoke, squinting. We have him, he rasped. The other ashen-hand man lifted the parchment, black symbols catching the weak light. He started chanting under his breath, low and ugly, like gravel. The ashen Sarah's palm thickened. Thomas did not attack them. Instead, he turned his wrist and flicked heat into the air above the forge coals behind him, just a thin layer, just enough to make the air shimmer. It bent the smoke slightly, twisting it like wind would. The chant stuttered for half a heartbeat as the symbols on the parchment wavered in the heat distortion. Sarah noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed. Clever, she said. Then she moved, not fast like a brawler, fast, like a knife for the ash in her palm, stretched into a thin whip and snapped toward Thomas's throat. Thomas did not jump back. He pulled his heat inward. Deep, dense, silent. The ash whip hit his heat shield and did not explode or burn. It simply clung. It tried to drink his warmth through the shield. Thomas felt the cold bite. He felt his skin try to go numb, but he didn't push more fire. He changed the shape. He made the heat inside him a core, like molten metal in a sealed mold. Nothing reaching outward. Nothing for the ash to wrap. The ash whip tightened. Confused, squeezing empty air. Thomas stepped sideways, grabbed the water barrel with one hand, and kicked it hard. The barrel toppled, splashing a sheet of water across the floor. The ashen-hand men cursed as their boots slid. Sarah didn't slip. She glided through it like the floor was dry. Thomas saw her weakness in that moment. Not that she was fragile, she wasn't, but she was anchored. The ash around her moved perfectly because something was feeding it. His eyes flicked past her cloak. There, near the wall, half hidden behind a stack of scrap iron, sat the black glass lantern the blood sniffers had carried earlier. Its surface was slick and dark, and smoke turned inside it like a slow storm. Sarah's real tool. Her leash. Thomas felt a flash of anger. They had brought that thing into Hemlock's forge, into a place meant for honest work. He did not roar. He did not explode. He moved. He sprinted low through the smoke toward the lantern. The ashen-hand man with the rod reacted, raising it like a spear. The rod hummed, and the air around it grew cold, like it was ready to stab the heat right out of Thomas's chest. Thomas slid across the wet floor, reaching the lantern first. He wrapped his fingers around it. Pain snapped up his arm. The lantern was cold like winter stone. It tried to drink his warmth instantly, like the ash whip had. Thomas clenched his teeth and pulled his heat deeper again, refusing to feed it. The lantern trembled in his grip. Sarah's eyes flashed. "Drop it," she said, voice suddenly sharp. Thomas didn't answer. He thrust the lantern toward the forge coals, not into the flame. Near it. Close enough that the air grew hot. He warmed the glass gently at first, then harder, heating it from the outside like a blacksmith heating metal. Steady, controlled, Patient. The lantern's surface shimmered. The smoke inside it began to spin faster. Sarah took a step forward, and the ash in her palm surged, no longer a whip but a clawed wave. It rushed for Thomas's face. Thomas snapped his free hand up and released a pulse of dry heat into the wet floor. Steam exploded upward, not fire. Steam. A white wall blasted between him and Sarah, blinding and forcing distance. Sarah hissed, recoiling a half step. Thomas used that breath to shove the lantern deeper into the heat. Toward the heart of the forge, the glass began to soften. He could feel it. It was like holding a secret that wanted to break. The ashen-hand man with the rod lunged at Thomas. Hemlock, still half tied to the chair, suddenly leaned forward and kicked the man's knee. Old man's strength. Pure stubbornness. The hunter stumbled. Thomas swung the lantern like a hammer and slammed it into the anvil. The softened glass struck iron with a dull, heavy thud. Cracks spidered across the lantern. The smoke inside it writhed. Angry, Sarah's calm cracked with it. Her ash magic flickered. Just for a heartbeat. Thomas saw it. He grabbed the smith's hammer from the workbench's hammer. The one he'd used 1,000 times as an apprentice, and struck the lantern again. Harder. The sound rang through the forge like a bell. The lantern cracked deeper. Sarah's ash claw shuddered, losing shape. What are you doing? She snapped, stepping closer. Thomas didn't look at her. He looked at the lantern and remembered the forge rhythm, the steady work, the calm heat. He struck the lantern a third time. The sound rang. Again. Something else happened this time. The symbols on the ashen-hand parchment flared and then dimmed like a candle choking. The ashen. Sarah's palm wavered. Because ash magic wasn't only hunger. It was pattern, and the hammer strike iron on iron was disrupting. That pattern like a heartbeat breaking a spell. Sarah realized it too. Her face tightened, and she raised both hands now, no longer pretending she was above effort. Dark smoke rolled off her fingers like a storm spilling down a mountain. The smoke rushed toward the lantern, trying to wrap it, protect it, feed it, hide it. Thomas lifted the hammer again. But this time he didn't strike the lantern. He struck the anvil. Once. The ring was deep, pure, loud. The ash wave hesitated. Thomas struck again. The ring vibrated through the floorboards, through iron, through bone. The ash magic shivered like it hated the sound. Hemlock stared, understanding dawning in his eyes. The old forge songs. Hemlock rasped. Thomas didn't know any songs, but his hands knew the rhythm anyway. He struck the anvil a third time, and with that ring he pushed a tight pulse of heat through the anvil itself, into the cracked lantern resting on it. The iron became a conductor. The lantern warmed from the inside now. The smoke inside the lantern screamed no sound, but Thomas felt it in his teeth. Sarah's eyes went wide with real anger. No, she hissed, and her ash magic lunged at Thomas's throat again. Thicker, heavier, desperate. Thomas did not move back. He raised his palm and made his heat shield a thin sheet, not a bubble, like a wall of shimmering air. The ash hit it and tried to drink. Thomas gave it nothing. He kept his heat inward, dense and silent. Then he flicked his fingers. A burst of steam shot upward from the wet floor again, and slapped the ash sideways. The ash scattered. Not destroyed, just displaced. And that was enough. Thomas swung the hammer down with all his strength. The lantern shattered. Black glass exploded across the anvil and floor like dark ice. The smoke inside spilled out in a wild, furious burst, then stuttered, like a beast suddenly losing its lungs. Sarah's ash magic collapsed. It didn't vanish fully, but it lost its shape. It fell around her like dirty fog, weaker, confused. Sarah stood still for one breath, staring at the broken lantern like she couldn't believe it. Then she turned her eyes to Thomas. The warmth in the room dipped, not because fire was gone, because her anger was cold. You broke a court relic, she said softly. Thomas's chest rose and fell. You broke into my master's forge, he said. You tied him up. You threatened children. Sarah smiled without kindness. I can do worse. She snapped her fingers, and the ashen-hand man with the rod lifted it again, aiming it at Hemlock this time. Stop, Thomas shouted. Sarah tilted her head. Careful, she said. Your heart will choose wrong, and ash loves wrong choices. Thomas's hands burned, but he forced the flame to stay in his bones. He looked at Hemlock. The old man's eyes were steady now, not afraid. Hemlock nodded once. Do what you must. Boy, Thomas's throat tightened. He turned back to Sarah. Let him go, he said, voice low. Sarah stepped forward. Give yourself, she replied. Kneel, accept the brand. Your village lives. Thomas felt the trap again. Choice. If he gave himself, they would drain him. Use him, hunt others like him. If he fought wildly, the village could burn. Ignis's voice entered his mind like a steady hand. Not loud, not angry, just there. Now. Thomas felt it. The forest outside. The dragon's presence like a furnace held behind stone. Ignis was ready. Thomas whispered in his mind, help me, but don't burn them. Ignis answered with one clear feeling, then don't give me chaos. Thomas swallowed. He turned his head toward the forge's front room, the open door, the square beyond it. He could hear movement outside now. Villagers whispering, footsteps, fear, someone crying. Sarah heard it too. She smiled again. They're gathering, she said. Good. Let them watch you kneel. Thomas stepped toward the forge door. Sarah frowned slightly. Where are you going? Thomas didn't answer her. He stepped out into the front room, then out into the village square. Lanterns swung. Faces stared. People backed away from him like he was fire itself. Someone shouted, it's him. The boy from the festival. Another voice cried, the forge. What's happening? Thomas raised both hands so everyone could see them. The faint glow under his skin shimmered in the lantern light. I won't hurt you, Thomas called. Voice steady. A woman clutched her child and stepped back anyway. Thomas swallowed hard. Listen to me, he said. There are strangers in the forge. They are dangerous. They are here for me. A man with a pitchfork stepped forward, shaking. Then leave, he yelled. Take your curse and go. Thomas flinched, but he didn't argue. Instead he nodded once. I will, he said. But not until my master is safe. The villagers murmured, confused. Some looked guilty. Some looked scared. Most looked like they wished this was a dream. Thomas pointed toward the forge. If you rush in, you will die, he said simply. They have weapons made to kill magic. Stay back. A harsh voice drifted from the forge doorway behind him. Sarah stepped out. Gray cloak flowing, pale hair braided tight. Two ashen-hand men followed, one dragging Hemlock by the rope, the other holding the rod like a spear. The village froze. Sarah's eyes swept the crowd like she was counting cattle. So small, she murmured. So easy. Thomas stepped in front of the villagers without thinking. Sarah smiled. Kneel, she said, loud enough for all to hear. And your village lives. Thomas's hands warmed, but he kept his palms down. He looked at Hemlock. The old man's face was bruised, but his eyes were still sharp. He gave Thomas a tiny shake of his head. Don't. Thomas's jaw clenched. He looked back at Sarah. You want me? He said. Then take me outside the village. Sarah's smile widened. Trying to be noble now? Cute. I'm serious, Thomas said. Outside. Past the river stones. If you want me to kneel, I'll kneel there. Not here, the villagers gasped. Some whispered his name. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She didn't like the offer because it meant losing control of the crowd. But she also liked power plays. She glanced at the villagers, then back at Thomas. Fine, she said. We'll walk. And if you run, your master dies first. Then the village burns second. Thomas nodded once. Agreed. Hemlock tried to speak, but the ashen-hand man shoved him forward. Thomas began walking toward the edge of the village, toward the forest path and the river stones beyond. Sarah followed. The two ashen-hand men followed. Hemlock stumbled between them. The villagers trailed at a distance, too scared to leave, too scared to stay. Thomas kept his breathing steady. 1. Calm. 2. Focus. 3. Protect. They reached the river stones where the forest began to swallow the path. Moonlight reflected on the moving water like broken silver. Sarah stopped and faced Thomas. Now, she said softly. Kneel. Thomas looked at Hemlock. Let him go. Sarah shook her head. First you kneel. Thomas lifted his eyes. No, he said. Calm. The word hit like a slap. Sarah blinked once. Her calm cracked again. Then watch, she said. and she raised her hand. The ash around her fingers thickened even without the lantern. It wasn't as strong, but it was still deadly. She reached toward Hemlock's chest. Thomas moved, not with wildfire, with speed. He slammed his foot down on the river stones and released a pulse of heat into the water. The river hissed. Steam rose in a sudden thick cloud, rolling between Sarah and Hemlock like a white wall. Sarah cursed and recoiled. Thomas sprinted through the steam toward Hemlock. The ashen-hand man with the rod thrust it at him. Thomas twisted, letting the rod pass his shoulder, and grabbed it with both hands. Cold stabbed his palms. The rod tried to drink heat straight out of him. Thomas didn't fight it with more heat. He released heat from a different place, not his hands, his core. He dumped a sharp burst of heat into the rod's metal from the inside out, like heating a nail until it bends. The rod glowed. The enchantment on it sputtered. Thomas yanked hard, ripped it free, and threw it into the river. It hit water with a violent hiss and sank. The ashen-hand man swore and reached for a knife. Hemlock, still half-died, drove his elbow into the man's ribs. Old man stubbornness again. Thomas grabbed the rope around Hemlock and heated it just enough to snap. Hemlock stumbled free. Behind them, Sarah's voice cut through steam like ice. Enough. The steam parted as she stepped forward, ash coiling around her again. She wasn't smiling now. Her eyes were like cold coals, sharp and hateful. Thomas turned to face her, placing himself between Sarah and Hemlock. The villagers watched from far back. Frozen, faces pale, Sarah lifted her hand, and ash magic rushed toward Thomas in a thick wave, trying to wrap him, choke him, drain him, brand him. Thomas pulled his heat inward again. Dense, silent, strong. The ash wave hit him and tightened. Around nothing. It squeezed. It searched. Thomas did not feed it. He held his core steady like an iron bar. Then he opened his palm and released a single burst of dry heat, not flame, straight into the ash itself. The ash shuddered, then scattered, turned to harmless gray dust in the air. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Thomas felt it. She wasn't used to someone refusing to panic. She was used to fear. Ignis's lesson was working. Asterisk. Sarah stepped closer anyway. You are strong, she admitted, for a child, but you are alone. Thomas's voice was low. No, he said. Sarah frowned. What? The forest behind Thomas shifted. A deep rumble rolled through trees, through river stones, through human bones. The villagers screamed. Ignis stepped out of the shadow, not with a roar, with quiet. The ancient dragon's scales glimmered like embers under ash-black glass. His eyes burned with ancient intelligence. He stood behind Thomas, like a mountain that decided to move. Sarah froze for the first time. The ashen-hand men stumbled back, suddenly remembering fear. Ignis spoke, not only in Thomas's mind now, but with a voice that shook the night. You came to steal what is not yours. Sarah lifted her chin, forcing herself to look brave. Guardian, she said, voice tight. We claim what the pact abandoned. Ignis's eyes narrowed. The pact was broken by thieves, not by us. Sarah's ash magic coiled again, even stronger now with anger. If you kill me, she hissed, the court will come. They will burn this village. They will hunt every ember-blood until the world goes cold. Ignis did not flinch. But Thomas did. Because she might be right. Thomas looked at the villagers, at the lantern lights, at the children clinging to parents. He could not let a war fall on them. Thomas stepped forward, raising a hand toward Ignis. Wait, he said softly. Ignis's gaze flicked to Thomas. Thomas breathed once. We end this here, Thomas said, loud enough for Sarah and the villagers to hear, but not with fire. Sarah's mouth curled. Then with what? Thomas looked down at the river. Water. Stone. Steam. Heat can shape without burning. He looked back at Hemlock, and his master suddenly understood. Hemlock shuffled closer to the river stones and picked up two things from the ground: a flat stone and a piece of iron scrap that must have fallen from some old work. He held them up like a smith offering tools. Thomas nodded. He stepped onto the river stones and placed his palm to the water again. He warmed it steady, controlled until steam rose in a thick rolling sheet. Not a blast, a curtain. The steam spread outward, covering the river bend like fog. hiding the village lights behind it. The villagers could still see shapes, but not details. Thomas wanted witnesses, but not casualties. Sarah snarled. Tricks. She threw ash into the steam. The ash moved like a predator, searching for heat. Thomas did not give it flames. He gave it structure. He pulled heat inward, then released it in slow pulses, like hammer beats, creating waves of warm air that pushed steam in circles. The steam became a spinning ring around Sarah and her hunters. A boundary, a cage made of fog and heat. Sarah's eyes widened. As she realized she was contained, she tried to step forward. The spinning steam slapped her ash back into her own face, disrupting her cast. She hissed, coughing for the first time. Thomas looked at Ignis through the fog. Now, Thomas whispered. Ignis understood. The dragon opened his mouth and breathed not a wild inferno but a thin, bright line of clean dragon fire, aimed straight upward into the sky, the air above. The steam ring lit up like sunrise. The ash magic in Sarah's hands flinched, like a creature fearing light. Thomas felt it clearly. Now ash magic hated purity. It loved hunger, fear. Cold, dragon fire was none of those. It was ancient, steady, and alive. Sarah screamed in anger and threw her ash toward Ignis's line of fire, trying to choke it. The ash disintegrated in the clean flame like dust in sunlight. Sarah stumbled back, shocked. Thomas stepped forward through steam, hands glowing faintly. He did not throw flame. He grabbed the iron scrap Hemlock tossed him and heated it until it glowed red-orange. Then, he plunged it into the river water. With a sharp hiss, he pulled it out quickly. The sudden cooling hardened it. Thomas wasn't making a sword. He was making a point. He held the piece of iron like a brand and walked toward Sarah. Sarah backed up, eyes flashing. Don't, she hissed. Thomas's voice was steady. You called me property, he said. You called my village nothing. You threatened to burn children. He raised the iron, now hard and hot enough to hurt, but not hot enough to explode. Sarah snapped her fingers, ash clawing toward Thomas's wrist. Thomas pulled his heat inward again, denying it food. The ash claw tightened around empty air. Thomas stepped through it and pressed the iron to the ground at Sarah's feet. Not to burn her, to burn her anchor. The earth under her boots was dusted with fine ash from her own magic. Thomas heated that ash slowly, then sharply until it melted into glass. A thin sheet of dark glass spread across the stone, sealing the ash into something solid, something trapped. Sarah's eyes went wide in real fear. Thomas understood now. Ash magic was hunger and dust. If you turned it into glass, it couldn't crawl, it couldn't feed, it couldn't move. Sarah tried to step back. Her boots stuck slightly on the new glass sheet. Thomas pushed another pulse of heat into the ash around her, melting more into glass, forming a ring at her feet. Sarah stumbled, suddenly trapped ankle deep in a widening glass circle. No, she snarled, struggling. The ashen-hand men rushed forward with chains and hooks, trying to reach Thomas. Ignis moved, one step, a single step. The ground shook, and the ashen-hand men froze like rabbits in front of a wolf. Ignis lowered his head and growled, low and real. The men backed away instantly. Thomas kept working. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He melted ash into glass and widened the ring until Sarah's boots were locked in place. Sarah flung ash at him again. Desperate, Thomas slammed his palm into the river stones and released a burst of steam, right into her ash wave. The ash clumped and fell, wet and useless. Sarah's face twisted in disbelief. You're just a boy, she hissed. Thomas looked her in the eyes. I'm a blacksmith, he said. I know how to shape heat without destroying everything. He lifted his hand and pointed at her. Leave, he said. Sarah laughed, but it shook. I can't. Thomas nodded once. Good. Ignis's voice entered Thomas's mind, quiet but firm. This is the moment. Choose what you are. Thomas swallowed. He could burn her. He could end her. But he remembered Hemlock's eyes. He remembered the children at the festival. He remembered that power without control was just another kind of monster. Thomas turned his head toward the villagers behind the fog. Look away, he shouted. Some did. Some couldn't. Thomas raised both hands and formed his heat into a tight core again, then released it as a single clean pulse straight into the glass ring at Sarah's feet. The glass flared bright, not like fire, like sunlight trapped in crystal. The ash inside it ignited and died instantly, purified by the heat, stripped of hunger. Sarah screamed not because she burned, but because her power snapped. It felt like a limb being torn off. She staggered, arms shaking, ash magic vanishing from her fingers like a dying shadow. Thomas stepped close and lowered his voice. "You're going to tell your court something," he said. Sarah glared. "What?" Thomas's eyes were calm. "That O'Caven is protected," he said. "That the ember-blood is awake. That Ignis is here." Sarah tried to spit a curse. Ignis exhaled a thin breath of warm air. Not flame, and it stole her words. Her throat tightened. She coughed. Thomas nodded once. "And if you come back," he said, "I won't meet you in my master's forge. I'll meet you in the forest, where your ash has no walls to hide behind." Sarah's eyes flashed with hate, but it was weaker now. She was suddenly just a person again, dangerous, yes, but not unstoppable. Ignis's voice rolled through the fog. "Go." Sarah struggled, trapped in the glass ring. "I can't move." Ignis stepped forward and placed one claw on the edge of the glass. He didn't break it with force. He warmed it gently until it softened just enough to release Sarah's boots. Sarah stumbled free, shaking, eyes wide. The ashen-hand men grabbed her arms, pulling her back toward the forest. Thomas held up a hand. "Leave Hemlock," he warned. They did. They retreated into trees like shadows fleeing sunrise. The steam ring thinned slowly, revealing the river bend again, the village lights beyond, the stunned faces of the villagers. Hemlock fell to one knee, breathing hard. Thomas rushed to him and grabbed his shoulders. "Master, are you hurt?" Hemlock coughed, then gave a rough laugh. "Boy," he rasped, "you turned ash into glass." Thomas blinked, exhausted. It just made sense. Hemlock's eyes softened. "That's the difference," he whispered. "Fire that destroys is easy. Fire that shapes, that's rare." Thomas swallowed and looked back at Ignis. The dragon stood quietly, huge and terrifying, yet somehow calm enough that the fear in the villagers began to shift into something else: shock, awe, confusion. A child peeked from behind his mother's skirt and stared at Ignis with wide eyes. The mother pulled the child back, shaking. Thomas stepped forward, turning toward the villagers. "I know you're afraid," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I was afraid too. But those people were going to hurt you. They were going to burn your homes." A man with the pitchfork spoke, voice trembling. "Are they gone?" Thomas nodded. "For now." The elder from the square stepped closer, leaning on his staff, eyes fixed on Ignis. "That thing," he whispered. "That is a dragon." Ignis lowered his head slightly, not aggressive, just present. Thomas took a slow breath. "Yes," he said. "And he saved you tonight." Murmurs rose. Some villagers looked like they wanted to run anyway. Thomas didn't blame them. He lifted his hands again, showing the faint shimmer of heat around his skin. "They came because of me," he admitted. "So I will not stay where you have to suffer for it." Hemlock's head snapped up. "No," he rasped. "Don't you dare run again, boy. Not after this." Thomas looked at him. "Master, if the court comes with more." Hemlock cut him off. "Then we prepare," Hemlock said, voice rough but strong. "We do what villages do when winter comes. We strengthen roofs. We store food. We make plans." Thomas stared, surprised. The elder nodded slowly. "We saw what you did," the elder said. "You didn't burn us. You didn't lose control. You protected us." A few villagers murmured agreement, hesitant but real. The pitchfork man lowered his weapon slightly, shame in his eyes. Thomas felt something tight in his chest loosen. He looked at Ignis, and the dragon's voice entered his mind like warm iron. "This is how pacts are remade, not with blood, with choice." Thomas swallowed. "Then we rebuild the forge," he said. Hemlock grinned through bruises. He rasped. "First thing tomorrow." The villagers slowly began to move again, whispering and staring, but not running. Parents pulled children home. Men gathered broken boards and checked doors. Women brought blankets for Hemlock. The fear was still there, but it was no longer pure panic. It was fear mixed with a strange new hope. Thomas stood by the river stones and watched the forest where Sarah had vanished. He knew she would report back. He knew the Cinder Court was real, but he also knew something else now. They could be fought. They could be outsmarted. They could be stopped without burning everything. Ignis stepped closer behind him, silent as shadow. Thomas whispered, "Will they come again?" Ignis's answer was honest. "Yes." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then I'll be ready." Hemlock limped over, supported by the elder. He looked up at Ignis, then at Thomas. "There's something you should know," Hemlock said quietly. Thomas frowned. "What?" Hemlock's voice softened. "Your mother's family," he said. "They weren't just blacksmiths. Long ago, they forged for dragons. Not weapons only, tools, seals, wards." Thomas stared. "You knew." Hemlock nodded. "I suspected," he admitted. "I saw the way the fire listened to you. I prayed it would stay asleep." Thomas looked down at his hands. "It didn't." Hemlock gave a tired smile. "No, and thank the skies it didn't." Ignis's eyes glowed faintly. "The court will try different chains next time," the dragon said aloud, voice low enough that only Thomas, Hemlock, and the elder could truly hear. "They will bring bargains, lies, fire that looks like mercy." Thomas met Ignis's gaze. "Then I'll keep learning," he said. Ignis nodded once. "Good." The elder cleared his throat. "So what happens now?" he asked, voice shaking slightly. "Do dragons live in our forest now?" Thomas almost smiled, even through exhaustion. "No," he said gently. "Not here. Not near your homes. Ignis will stay deeper. Hidden." The elder nodded, relieved and still stunned. Hemlock touched Thomas's shoulder. "And you," he said. "You stay. You forge. You train. You guard." Thomas looked at the village lights, then at the forest line. He had always dreamed of something bigger than a poor apprentice life. Now something bigger had found him. And it wasn't glory. It was responsibility. Thomas took a slow breath and nodded. "I'll stay," he said. "I'll guard Oakhaven." Ignis's mind brushed his like a warm flame that didn't burn. "Then your story begins and ends the right way. Not with fear, with purpose." As dawn began to lighten the sky, the river's silver turned pale blue. The villagers worked quietly, repairing what they could. The forge door was propped open again. Hemlock's anvil sat cold for now, but not abandoned. Not dead. Thomas walked back toward it, tired bones, steady heart. He touched the anvil with his palm. Warmth stirred under the iron, answering him like a friend. Thomas looked at Hemlock and spoke softly, as if promising the forge itself. "They won't take me," he said. "They won't take this village. Not while I'm breathing." Hemlock's eyes shone. "That's my boy." And deep in the forest, Ignis lifted his head, watching the horizon where the cinder court would surely gather. For now, Oakhaven still stood. Its roofs still leaked, its walls still cracked, but its heart was no longer helpless, because the fire in the forge would burn steady again. And this time, it would burn for protection, not destruction.